a little over a year ago now, I posted my first mod to the Steam Workshop, which seems insane because I've been modding this game for a few years now, but none of them were ever like releasable in a finished state until this one. Today, I'm going to be updating a heavily improved version of these tax rates, but this mod seeks to make it so the tax strategies are a little bit more balanced. So for example, here's vanilla, and you can see that high, low, and minimal tax is never an optimal strategy, no matter how many turns in the future you're projected out to, which is not at all what your intuition would be when playing Shogun. It would be that like if I leave it on minimal and I'm having really high growth, then this should eventually win out. So I changed the tax rates so that the other strategies would be more viable in the long term. The first iteration of these rates that I applied, which you can see here on the old mod page, which I haven't updated yet, these are the new modded tax rates. The problem with these is that it made it strictly easier than vanilla, which is a little bit of a problem. And in some cases, it made it much easier if you went for a breadbasket strategy. The other problem with these rates that I didn't like is that you can see they're more squished, which is sort of something you have to deal with somehow when you're going to modify these tax rates to make each of these choices more viable, is you have to deal with the fact that the vanilla tax rates are way too spread out, because the difference between high and very high as a percentage is like 20% versus the difference between minimal and low as a percentage is 100%, right? So that this is not actually like a linear scale the way that it should be. It's more of like it's like a logarithmic curve or something like that. With how the tax rate actually gets applied. So the jump between minimal and low is massive versus the jump between high and very high is not that big. It's really hard to balance it with the spread out of tax rates. But in any case, these are a little too squished. And one of the downsides of this is that it means that when you're strapped for cash and you try to bump up your tax rates, it's not going to help you very much, and vice versa. When you drop down to minimal, your income is not being hurt all that much. So it turned out in my playtesting that, number one, it was easier to play the game, like I said, economically, which is kind of a problem because that's a huge source of difficulty, especially if you're playing on higher difficulty levels in the game. But also, it just meant that playing with the slider, the tax slider, it didn't feel, in the actual game, it didn't feel like it was doing much, because the truth is that it wasn't. It was only in the long term that you really got to see these effects. So I have new tax rates, but let's take a look at what we're trying to accomplish and how I did it if you're interested in nerding out. So this is the spreadsheet that I'm using to model all of this, because I could just take stabs in the dark and whatever, and then play test it and see how it worked. But I would rather actually know and have a system for developing some kind of intuition about how all this works. So these are the vanilla rates. And the problem with vanilla is that here's the very high alternating line, this red line, and then the gray line is the normal line. And you can see at some point it intersects. This is per turn income. Here's cumulative income. And then here are those intersection points down here, just so you don't have to eyeball it on the graph. You can see that there's never a point at which low, minimal, or high alternating is the best strat. So that's kind of a problem. And it doesn't matter, if I change any of these economic factors, it will always be that way. Like I could come up with some wacky numbers here. Let's have some actually insane growth here. And okay, there we go. Now we got a different result where high versus normal are the two competing strategies, but I had to have 5,000 growth to make that happen. So let's even say 100 growth. Okay, now high alternating becomes a strat at some point. But again, when are you going to be an example with 100 growth? So probably not ever. 50 growth is pretty extreme, and then there we go. So it just doesn't show up on any time scale that matters in the game. So that's kind of a problem, that in vanilla the rates are designed so that none of the tax options actually matter. So let's take a look at the most recent update to the tax rates and take a look at the graphs here. So this is the win turn for this exact economic situation that I'm modeling over here with these numbers. If you want to play around with this spreadsheet, you can see you can change the tax rates here from this drop down, compare between vanilla and the most recent version, which is going to be 2.3 as of the release of this video, at least. This is the old version, version 1. And then anything that's in yellow here is like for you to play around with, and anything that's blue is a calculated value. So you could manually modify the administrative tax rate here if you wanted, but it would be better to just change the number of provinces, and then this will automatically update with the proper administrative cost number. So yeah, play around with this sheet. You're gonna have to go to File, Make a Copy if you want to play around with these values, because you can view this sheet, but you can't edit it unless you make a copy for yourself. So there's all these economic factors that are fun to play around with. But let's take a look at this, because this is what's important. So in this current economic situation, very high is good in the short term. High alternate. Again, this is alternating, because I'm assuming you can't leave these on high and very high due to public order. This is good. After 9 turns, it becomes better than very high. After 22 turns, it becomes better than high. Normal becomes better than high. After 32 turns, low becomes better than normal, and so on. And what you see here is that these graphs, where they intersect, like there's this point in time where red is highest, and then there's this point in time where high is highest, and then there's a brief window where normal's highest there in green. And that's kind of what I wanted, is I wanted each tax strategy to matter. In this particular economic situation, the cumulative win turn, the only viable strategies are very high and low. So where these graphs intersect, these will be the only ones that win out. But that changes actually depending on what your other economic factors are. So if I bump up my growth by quite a lot, you can see that the cumulative win term actually ends up overlapping in a way that's kind of more desirable. The minimal will win out eventually, but it's so far off of turn 100 that it doesn't, it's not modeled here, because I'm assuming we only care about 100 turns. And that's pretty extreme that you would even care about, modeling it that far out in the future. If I bump it up even more, then we should be able to see minimal eventually on the graph, I think. I don't know, maybe not. Maybe not, but that's okay. There are other values that will affect this as well. So for example, if I add a church, let's say on average I have a mission in each province, that's going to add a additional growth modifier of 0.04. Doesn't hugely impact it, it looks like, but it does. It does impact it a little bit. If I increase the level of farms here, I mean, realistically speaking, that would affect growth, but here all it's changing is the base wealth in each province. So that actually improves the high tax strategies for the most part. So like you can see, low and minimal gets kind of worse. Normal gets worse when I bump it up to land consolidation, and the higher tax strategies get slightly better. So that's kind of how this spreadsheet works. And then there are all sorts of other like things that could modify the base tax rate, like tax reform. You could have Metsuke, and this is assuming that you have a Metsuke in every town, which is obviously not possible when you have 25 or 30 provinces. But just for modeling purposes, I wanted to understand how modifications like this that are so big to the tax rate would affect the tax strategy that you select. And you can see like this makes actually a pretty big difference. So if I have some kind of way to boost tax rate by quite a lot in all of my provinces, then it makes up for the fact that these lower strategies have such a lower tax rate. And you can see that the crossover point becomes much earlier. So now minimal is winning out, and it's like very strongly winning out. And the main thing that I just changed here was the fact that we have Metsuke in each town. So even if I have rank 1 Metsuke, it makes kind of a big difference. Again, you can't actually do that in each town, but the truth is that you probably have 5 towns or so that are the main source of town wealth and growth. And so if you park those in those towns, then perhaps over time, like these are actually doing their thing by bumping up the tax rate so much in those particular breadbasket towns. So here are the actual rates. When you change the dropdown, it's these fields that get changed based off of, this list of potential different tax rates. So you can see all the iterations I went through. Here's all the stuff I tried before I published version 1. But you can see, I added some notes here that it makes it a little bit easier, and so I ended up playing around with a bunch of different factors and how I could play with them. And here's the numbers that I ended up with. So as compared to vanilla, let's see if I can't just put these side by side. And those aren't vanilla, these are vanilla. So let me just drop this here so you can see it side by side. So vanilla has a base, wealth, percent of wealth, like this is the actual tax rate that goes from 1 to 50. This goes from 15 to 40. So it is flatter. and the jump between is about 6 percentage points each level. So it's not super big, but the difference between minimal and very high is fairly large. So you're going to see a more than doubling of your income when you switch between minimal and very high, like at the extreme. So that I'm still getting quite a big influx in terms of like the numbers when you're switching tax rates, which was part of my goal, right? In this case, wealth is being modified by quite a lot because we're assuming we have Metsuke in each town. So let me just turn that off, and I'll turn tax reform off. Maybe you have sumo tournament at this point, so maybe I'll turn that one on. And yeah, so we can see even with the tax rate modified, you're still earning twice as much koku when you go between minimal and very high. So that's good. That's desirable. Growth penalties, a negative number means that instead of a penalty, it's giving you a benefit here. So having it on low or minimal taxes actually gives you a benefit. I found that this was necessary in order for these strategies to ever win out. Like you have to give some kind of growth benefit. Also, the percentage growth penalty. So there's growth penalty, which is the static number, and then this is a percentage multiplier that's added to any type of non-tax sourced growth bonus you're getting. So if your growth is positive, if it's negative, this number is ignored. But if your growth is positive, then this is an additional penalty that's added to this static number to your growth. So let's say you have 100 growth, then in this case you're going to get -6 growth from leaving it on minimal from your tax rate, even though there's no static here. If you have 100 growth, then you're getting -14 plus the -1 here, the static value. And then of course up here, you'd be getting -90 plus the -15 static value. So that's how this works based on your tax rate. Here, again, I found it necessary that you have to actually reward the player growth-wise for being on these, not just penalize them less, which is what this does. You have to actually reward them. So in this case, you're adding a 10% modifier to all positive growth you're getting in that province, like a 10% bonus if your tax rate is on low. And you're getting a base +1. So that's pretty good. And then this is all the way up to +45. So you have to actually, yeah, like I said, reward people quite a lot in order for these strategies to win out. And, it's not game breaking. Like a 45% bonus is pretty good, but, take a look at how much less money you're earning, compared to leaving taxes on normal. It's almost half as much money that you're earning per turn. So that's a pretty good, consequence for leaving it on minimal, even though you're getting this really massive growth boost on top of this static +15 growth in each province. And it takes a long time. I mean, this is just 15 koku per turn, times your actual wealth rate. So 15% of 15 is what you're getting. So you're basically getting like 1 koku per turn per province with just this static bonus on its own. So it's not like, these look like pretty big numbers, but they're actually fairly balanced. And that all makes sense in the spreadsheets. So the final thing that I tried to balance is these numbers based off of, as compared to vanilla. So let's just take a look at these two numbers. Here I'm getting 10,600 per turn and 412,000 cumulatively when, whichever best strategy there is. So 10,000 per turn, 412,000 cumulatively on my taxes. And then as compared to vanilla, 11,494 cumulatively. So it's not that different, but it is harder. So that's important to me because the earlier version, you can just see here real quickly. Here's version 1 as currently published. I'm getting 20,000 koku per turn if I use the minimal tax strategy, which is the optimal for per turn wealth, and 703 cumulatively. And if I compare that to vanilla, that's a lot more money. That's like twice as much per turn and, 1.5 times as much or so cumulatively. So I just found in playtesting and other people, confirmed this, and I should have just looked at the graphs to think about this aspect of the tax rate, is that although it accomplished my goal in a lot of ways here to see these bars intersect in the way that I wanted, and these look much more beautiful, like it's much more of a rainbow here, which is kind of what I wanted. And the crossover turn is much earlier. The problem is that it makes the game too easy. So version 2.3 is very, very close, like overall to the rates that you'd be getting on in vanilla, with the caveat that it's actually slightly harder, and to even get close to the vanilla amount, you would need to be using the proper tax strategy in order to get close to that cumulative amount. So we'd have to actually be leaving it on normal in this case in order to get 412,000 koku. In fact, let's just check that out, because this is cumulative by turn 50, right? So yeah, that's correct. So let's just check it out, what the other tax rates would be. So we're looking for very high alternating. So if I go to cumulative calculated wealth per turn, and I go to total earned by turn, and I scroll over to 50, boop. Okay, so there's the normal amount that we were just looking at. Very high alternating would be 488,000 koku. So I'm actually earning less koku per turn, right? That makes sense, because this is telling me that the winning strategy is supposed to be normal. So I'm making less koku by doing very high alternating 488,000. This is vanilla, and let's check out 2.3. So 412 is cumulative. And if I go to calculated wealth, very high alternating, 371,000. So I'm making 40,000 less koku or so. If I had used the same strategy I would have in vanilla, I'm making a lot less money cumulatively. Again, the per turn minimal should be 10,602, 682. But if I didn't use the optimal, and I was using my previous strat of very high alternating to normal, which is what most people do, 7,200, or if I left it on normal. So like this is what, if you just try to play my mod the way you normally would, you're earning 7,200 koku when you should be earning 10,000 in this particular economic situation. And so as compared to vanilla, you would normally be earning 11,000 if you had a normal tax strategy, which is what it happens to be recommending here. So that's kind of bad, you know, going from 11,000 koku to suddenly, if you used normal strategy, 7,200 koku. Not so bad if you went normal instead of alternating normal and very high. Then the difference between this and the optimal happens to only be about 1,000 koku. But my point is that this mod succeeded in my design goals, and that each value will actually cross over at some point. There is a reason to use these different tax rates depending on your economic situation, that Metsuke doesn't totally break this in half, which is good, and also that it doesn't make the game easier than vanilla. In fact, if anything, it makes it very slightly harder, not just in terms of the total koku, which it does, but also in terms of like, if you don't pay attention to the tax rates and you're not incorporating that into your strategy, then you'll be earning significantly less than you would have if you had just played vanilla and did a normal strategy. So that's it. That's all the stuff. And I'm very happy with this particular part where I am calculating the administrative cost. This was actually kind of hard to determine, and I had to do a little bit of guesswork here to figure out that some of these values aren't working as they did in games like Empire Total War. So anyway, but I think I nailed it based on my testing. This is the actual way that administrative cost is calculated based off of number of provinces. So, you know, whenever you change this number, this administrative cost number should be accurate. In fact, let's just do a simple test here. We're getting 16,000 per turn income when I have 60 provinces. Let's see if that drops when I add a 61st province. 16,700 versus 16,600. So you are still gaining more money overall, even when you add a 61st province, but it's not very much money. Because like a lot of people will say, you know, at some point, capturing new provinces actually costs you money. And I don't think that's ever true. Maybe with some really extreme other values, like maybe if I dropped these tax bonuses, let's see, 14,399 to 14,542. Yeah, so even here, I'm still earning about 150 more koku by adding the 61st. Let's go 64 to 65. That should be the most extreme. 14,963 to 15,101. So there you go. You're still earning 100 more koku when you capture another province with these particular variables. So, so yeah, I mean, maybe this is only in the long term. That would be interesting to check too, because this is, I'm only seeing it by turn 50. So all this growth stuff is, let's set the growth to 0. That should be a better judge. So 10,713, 10,812. So even in a case where I'm not earning additional growth, like over time, over 50 turns, you're still earning more money by capturing the 65th province. So anyway, a little side note there. This is all, why did I go to this level of modeling? Like, what the heck am I doing? Well, this is all part of a larger complete overhaul to the game that I'm making, which the focus of the overhaul is not even the economy. That's not the point. But I do want to make some changes to the economy. The basic, like the log line of the overhaul that I'm making is I want players to have more interesting strategic choices throughout the campaign. And I want to fix systems that are obviously broken, like the tax rate, so that they actually become interesting strategic knobs. And I want it to have a very vanilla-like feel. Like, I'm not going to be adding a whole lot of new stuff to the game that isn't already there. I'm just fleshing it out more. Like, imagine if CA spent the next 10, 15 years, actually fleshing out Shogun 2, maybe with like some DLCs and stuff like that added, like they did with the clans, like clans that are a little bit more divergent and interesting, like that kind of thing. So anyway, that's the goal. And I figured, if I want to do things like overhaul the economy, and in still a vanilla-like way, but I wanted to improve it and fix some of the problems. For example, people take a look at return on investment of things like in the market chain building, whereas building one market level building in each province is sometimes worth the return on investment, but upgrading it beyond that is often never good in any economic situation. So things like that, like I wanted to fix it. And if I'm going to do that, then it's going to be really helpful for me to model these things and actually look at graphs and be able to change these numbers and kind of develop an intuition for how these things are affecting each other so that I can make the mod as best as I can be. So go ahead and check out my new balanced taxes version that I'll be releasing today and download it. It'll make the game slightly harder than it was before, but it's going to be accomplishing my design goals much better. And if you want to see more mods like this, it's going to take me years to release my overhaul mod, and it'll probably be a while before I release my next one, whichever one that is, like some small piece of the overhaul mod, just like this new tax rate. But over time, I plan on releasing it. So go ahead and follow. I mean, I don't know if you can do that on Steam. I assume you can. But yeah, go ahead and follow if you're interested in more stuff like that. Thanks for watching and happy taxing.